All right, so today's day 23 of the day 30 challenge. Before I start, I am pretty impressed by what we have achieved so far. I was just going through my analytics, and first of all, thank you now to the 62 subscribers who essentially joined from the very start. That's essentially two classrooms. And I still can't, imagine that 62 people, are willing to put up with my stuff. So thank you. That is not a given. Apart from that, I've had still a lot of interesting conversations through the comments. So keep that up. I'll try to answer as thoughtful as possible. Doing videos for each comment is kind of unsustainable because I thought not a lot of people were going to comment, but turned out I was wrong, which is a fortunate sign. But I think I'll just reply when it's like a really complex question or when I feel like it's easier to explain when I'm on camera. So thank you again. We've I've been doing this for 3 weeks essentially, and it's encouraging, it's really nice to see that people still care about, I wouldn't say niche stuff, but things that might affect how they view their environment and how they want or like how they choose to interact with the environment based on the information that maybe I can give based off my readings or encourage people to read actually. So let's start, I guess. So for today's video, I thought, why not talk about Palantir and what I've actually learned from them? Because I guess the critics, if you've been following the news, you know what Palantir is doing, that essentially producing softwares and systems that are being used by huge institutions in the US, but now even in Germany, to act as counterterrorism, kind of prevention systems. Um, yeah, and so they try to pin down criminals when something happens, predict even that. It's incredibly complex, and I think unless you did work at Palantir, you don't really know what they're essentially doing. So I think I'm essentially done with the explanation of Palantir does for now. But I wanted to go deeper into the structure of Palantir, of how it's built. Because if you look at the website and if you came across the name Palantir, you're kind of like, well, that's kind of like an exotic name for, a security company, kind of, isn't it? And just because I've read Peter Thiel's biography, I figured out, or I found out that Palantir comes actually from the Lord of the Rings series, where Palantir is a seeing stone, or loosely translated, Palantir is actually a stone which can you let's see things from far away. And that's exactly what Palantir is doing. So I think unless you haven't watched or read Lord of the Rings, you won't get that note. It's kind of important, I think, because Peter Thiel is a huge nerd, I think still, in regards to Lord of the Rings, which we don't judge because I like Dune and we're not judging that. Anyways, that's not the main thing. So we have figured out the name. Now, I wanted to introduce you to the most, or like the two most impactful and most important co-founders of Palantir that you've heard about and their educational background, because this is what's going to be very important for Palantir. So let's start with current CEO Alex Karp. He's one of the co-founders and he is a non-technical founder. So that essentially means he can't code. He studied specifically social theories. So he got his bachelor's in social theory. I just had to look it up. He did law at Stanford University. I think at the same time as Peter Thiel, because otherwise they wouldn't have met. And then he actually went to Germany to do his PhD at the Goethe University in Frankfurt for neo-Marxist social philosophy. Best believe I did not read his PhD work yet, so can't really tell you what he's talking about. Now, for Peter Thiel, second co-founder, I'm not quite sure how he is involved in Palantir at the moment. He might be a member of the board, but I didn't verify that, so don't take it from me. Peter Thiel got into Stanford University. He studied philosophy, and then he went on to do Stanford Law. And fortunately, unfortunately, I don't know, he didn't end up being a lawyer. Like he worked for some time as a lawyer, but found out that he was pretty unsatisfied with it, as he were not able to really impact the way humanity essentially behaves with new tech. As a side note, Peter Thiel was the first investor in Facebook, Meta, because he realized, based off readings of a French philosopher, René Girard, that people desire things that other people desire. This phenomenon is called mimetic desire, which turns out to be true if you look at Insta nowadays and TikTok and all these other social media platforms where we are mimicking each other. That's why we start to look like each other. That's why we kind of develop the same tastes, the same dreams, and the same like achievements that we want to achieve because other people desire it and did it. We are just so easily to be influenced. And based off that fact, Peter Thiel invested into Facebook. Huge thing. Maybe I'll cover this in future series. Anyway, so now you know the two most important founders, both non-technical, both fluent in understanding societies, social frameworks, and also essentially how people think, because philosophy is really tied to psychology at a certain point, depending on what niche you pick to study. But either way, you're going to come across Sigmund Freud and other psychologists and understand how they perceive the human nature. Now, how come that two non-technical founders, they had three other co-founders, which were technical, who were technical, so they kind of balanced it out. But how come that two of the most important co-founders were non-technical and had essentially no understanding of how you build software and how you connect data points to predict certain actions? To found a company that is specialized in counterterrorism prevention, it's a huge question, right? And I think if you think about it, you do understand, I think, as someone who comes from the humanities, you understand much more about humankind as someone who comes from the STEM direction. Because I can tell you, I'm studying molecular biotechnology. We do nothing with ethics, we do nothing with human interaction. We don't study people, we only study certain parts of people, namely the smallest one, molecules, right? That will never come into fruition, this knowledge, because I'm not interacting with people, right? So huge lack of skill in all STEM majors. If you're doing a minor, that's a different thing, but for all those who are doing STEM majors, that's our biggest disadvantage. We don't know how to interact with people, essentially, how to read people, how to establish ideas that connect people. Because in the end, Palantir's biggest customers, they are federal institutions, CIA, FBI, German police even. Like these are customers that you need to build trust with. You need to show them the effect of your software because it's taxpayers' money that is involved. So Palantir built a company around institutions that were hesitant to break into tech. And they started this like 15 years ago. And now they've proved to be successful. And I'm very sure that without understanding people, how they behave, what their biggest fear is, because if you look at Palantir and the interviews that Alex Karp is giving, they give you geopolitical reasons to use Palantir. And these reasons they align so well with the Western world, right? Because you're telling them, if you use us, Palantir, we can guarantee you a place in this world. And if you understand enough history and enough, essentially, philosophy of history, you know that the West has been craving a certain domination over the rest of the world because that's a business model, essentially, because there's no way you can get rich by focusing on your country without exploiting other ones. That's how it always has been. And Palantir knows that. So when they tell them, you're going to stay relevant and safe with us, there's a huge majority that's going to say, well, we'll take Palantir, despite the privacy concerns. Switzerland did not, though, just mentioning that. So you have this one. And then you also have that Palantir is closely aligned with Western ideologies. That is, they believe that you still need to protect Western ideologies. They say that explicitly. There is no other company, tech company, that really tells you we need to protect ideologies XYZ because there is a moral imperative to do so. No one says that. SpaceX does not do that. Meta does not do that. Google does not do that. X does not do that. No one says in their interviews, we have values that we need to protect. All the interviews by all other tech companies, they're all focused on AI. What is after large language models? You see the pattern, right? Like they're just technical. That's why they cannot reach institutional customers. That's it. But also the fact that I don't think an institution would want to buy Meta for its employees in any way. But in general, these companies, even if they were, they could not have the institutional reach that Palantir currently has. And so I think the main point that I learned from Palantir was that despite everything you've been studying, you need to allocate enough time to study philosophy because philosophy at its root has enabled thinking ways or like patterns that you use or like that you can use for essentially every situation and every business project and every idea that you want to realize because you can always learn STEM. There are things in STEM that are laws that are not going to change, where you can assume that even if you don't focus on one area for the next 10 years, the state of art of technologies will probably stay the same. You cannot say that with philosophy because it's still evolving, even though we rely on philosophers from 300 years and thousands of years ago, because that's how tech and humanities play. Tech is now a catalyst for the humanities, and that's what Palantir has been using. Like they will onboard people to their team. So they have two fellowships, by the way. One is, I think, the Merit Fellowship for US high school students, which aims at taking the very best students into Palantir, paying them 200K a year, which is crazy, by the way, and employing them full time, and then giving them the option to convert to Palantir forever. Because if they want to do tech, Alex Cobb famously said that working at Palantir is now more worth than a tech degree, which I'll agree with him on that one. So you do that, you can be employed as a high school student with no formal degree, which is unimaginable in Europe. And then you have the Divergent Thinkers Fellowship, where they essentially take people from STEM, humanities, everybody who has enough qualifications to fit the team. So yeah, I think I need to study more philosophy because if it's weaponized, it might be too late to understand what they're doing. And I don't want to mistrust all companies, but I feel like you should, protect that thing from letting it fall into ideologies that you don't understand. And that's essentially my biggest takeaway from Palantir, I think. But feel free to dig deeper into the website. I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff that they do, which we probably don't get to know because I'm not working at Palantir chances are you are also not working at Palantir, so I guess we'll never know.